Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, everyone. We are going to get started now. I am Michael Pickard. I am the Eudora Welty Chair of Southern Literature here at Millsaps and the director of our Visiting Writers Series. I want to welcome you all. Thank you all so much for coming out. This is an event in partnership with the Millsaps Writing Program and the Millsaps Women and Gender Studies Program. Wonderful to be partnering with my colleagues at the university to bring Casey Parks, a Millsaps alum, someone we're very proud of here to campus. So I am going to invite my colleague Laura Franey to come up and give the introduction in just a second. But before Laura comes forward, just want to note that we do have copies of Casey's books for sale over in the corner from Lemuria. So please stop by at the end of today's reading. Pick up a copy of Casey's book. I know she would be delighted to sign it for you. And we'll have a reception afterwards right outside here to the right. So please join us for that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Laura Franey, Associate Professor of English here at Millsaps, to come and give our introduction. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you all for being here. Fantastic crowd. I'm so happy to have you here to listen to Casey and interact with her. So I'm so honored to introduce Casey Parks, an incredibly talented writer, and a person who is both curious about and deeply caring about the world and the individuals in it. She has always evinced both a delightfully wry sense of humor and a sense of humility as she has gone about forging a great career in journalism, writing, and independent filmmaking. So I met Casey over 20 years ago when she came to Millsaps from northern Louisiana to start her freshman year in the fall of 2001. Now, I won't say a lot about her experience because I'm sure she'll talk about that, and you can read about it in the book. It's so fun to read about that time in the book. But I would just say that Casey really thrived here. We in the English department we're so fortunate to have her in our classrooms and working on things with us. Just a real joy to have. There are so many great stories, but I won't tell them. However, I would ask you to indulge me in just one personal story. Okay, so one of the reasons I'm so thrilled that Casey is here tonight is that she can sign my copy of the book, which is great, because when she was a student here, she went to another author's reading and got a book signed for me, which was a total surprise for me. She and some other students in our post-colonial literature class heard that Salman Rushdie was reading at the University of Mississippi, and they drove up there and got him to sign a book for me, and it was incredibly special. So it's so exciting that, you know, she is an author now and touring the country with her own book, and so she can sign my book for me tonight. Okay, facts about Casey. There is so much that is wonderful about Casey. Let me just hit a few highlights of her great career. So currently, she is a reporter at the Washington Post, having been hired there after she completed a master's degree in politics and global affairs, correct? Okay, from Columbia University. At Columbia, she was also a Spencer Fellow. Before matriculating at Columbia, she worked as a staff writer at the Oregonian for 10 years. She's also been a fellow for the Hechinger Report. I don't know how to say it, is that right? Hechinger, okay, all right. So, and doing just wonderful reporting for them. She really focused on education and has some splendid stories about education. She's published in The New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, and she has a long list of prizes and awards, including recognition by the National Headliner Awards for her stories about a boy and Straight Outta St. John's. She had a grand prize at the Portland Bridge Festival for her short film, The Amazing Jerks. I haven't seen it, and a front page award for Best Feature from the Newswomen of New York for her story, A College Degree. So Casey is here tonight to read from and talk about her genre-bending book, Diary of a Misfit. So the book tells the story of several intertwining lives, so her own, of course, so it's part memoir about her, also about Roy Hudgens, so she'll probably talk about him, and about her late mother. I think that the book really showcases Casey's sensitivity to the joys and challenges of being human, really for anyone, any human being, but especially for those who may be out of the mainstream, pushed out of the mainstream for a variety of reasons. So I'm thrilled to have her here, as I said, and I hope that you will join me in giving Casey a very warm welcome back to her alma mater for tonight's talk.
Thank you all so much for coming here. I am extremely nervous, so that means I'm very sweaty and also shaking. If you want a picture with me later, maybe don't get too close, because I don't know how good I smell. Part of why I'm nervous is just because there's so many different people here who made me who I am, and I feel really emotional, like I could actually cry. The epigraph in the book is from a Rita Dove poem that Dr. Franey introduced me to. My figuring out I was gay actually started in Dr. Smith's class, so you can take credit for my homosexuality. Ellen in the back let me live with her for $100, which was just insane rent at a time when I didn't have a lot of money or really prospects in life, but just she believed in me and even taught me how to ride a bike and would bike me to my first job and my first newspaper job. PK from my mom's hometown, who's in the book. Harvey and Debrianna, whom I wrote about for the New York Times, who drove 2 hours to be here. And Nina, whom I really looked up to when I was a teenager, of what it was possible to be, how it was possible to be any kind of artist. And just so many of y'all. So I'm going to read something I've never read out loud before, except when I did the audiobook. And when you do an audiobook, it's kind of weird because you just read to someone that you don't actually see, like it's just a person in your headphones. In my mind, he's the guy, Phoebe's boyfriend, who goes to Minsk and Friends, like Hank Azaria, but in that specific role. So I've never actually read this, but I thought it'd be good to read because it takes place in Millsaps. And essentially what happened is I took a religious studies kind of mixed class with Dr. Smith, and very early in the semester, he was talking about the ways the Bible contradicted itself. And for some reason, he was not disturbed by this. He was excited about the different versions of Palm Sunday and stuff in the Bible. And at that point, I thought that every single word in the Bible was true and sent down from God himself. And though I had gone to church about 1 billion times, give or take, I did not know there were different versions of the story in the Bible. And that really rocked my world. And then right after, a professor who's no longer here, her name was Sandra Smithson, assigned this book that was called The Good Book. And it was by this Harvard chaplain. And there was a chapter that was called The Bible and Homosexuality. And I actually read it just right next door. And it was suggesting that maybe homosexuality was not actually a sin. And I got extremely nervous, ran out of the building for some reason, closed the book, ran back to my dorm bathroom and read it on the toilet in secret. And at that point, the only gay people I knew were Ellen DeGeneres and Elton John. My very close personal friends. So I didn't really have a concept of how do you be gay or how do I know I'm gay? And yet something in me was just you're gay. There's no one to project that gayness onto, but I just knew it about myself, and I really didn't want it to be true, and I was very scared. And yet here was Dr. Smith saying the Bible's got different stuff going on in it, and here's Dr. Smithson. I didn't realize y'all were all Smiths. With this book saying it might be about something else. So I am not a religious scholar, so I apologize for any misinterpretations of the Bible I'm about to read. Okay. So this is after I read that book on the toilet. I wrote the word lesbian in my journal 12 times that fall, but I didn't tell anyone I suspected I was one. I went to frat parties and kissed drunk boys, hoping their sloppy mouths would inspire something in me. But no amount of contact with a guy felt as thrilling as spotting a girl I thought might be gay. There were a handful of short-haired girls on campus, all of them seniors the year I was a freshman, but I never worked up the nerve to talk to them. Instead, I ate extra bowls of Lucky Charms so I could sit in the caf long enough to watch the short-haired girls eat. That fall, I rented every Angelina Jolie movie, and I bought a poster of Sarah Jessica Parker because it showed off her abs. Friends was still running new episodes then, and when my mom called me every Thursday to discuss the latest one, I pretended to pine for Joey, though I secretly longed for Rachel. I still have a crush on Jennifer Aniston, so if she's watching this live stream, hit me up. After a few months, I worked up the nerve to tell one person, the liberal arts professor who assigned the Gomes book. I was too scared to say the word gay out loud, so I emailed it, and the professor responded with such warmth that I began to daydream about telling my mother. I wrote my mom emails that November, casually trying to explain that I'd been studying the Bible and had learned new and interesting things about Sodom and Gomorrah. Did you know Sodom and Gomorrah were already being destroyed before any homosexual acts occurred? It's very possible that the people in Sodom were just being more wicked by basically raping these strangers, i.e. the angels who appeared to them to be strangers. Something had to have been going on before to make the angels come in the first place. No mention of homosexuality is made as to the reasoning behind the angels' need to come and destroy the nation. My mom never responded, and I was too embarrassed to bring it up on the phone. I read and reread Gomes's book that year, hoping I'd miss the sentence I most wanted to find. Though he'd poked holes in the stories my pastors had told me about homosexuality, Gomes stopped short of definitively saying it wasn't a sin. I spent that whole semester agonizing. I couldn't sleep, so I tiptoed outside most nights and prayed out loud in an abandoned stairwell. "If you're there, God," I'd whisper, "tell me why you made me this way. Take away these feelings." I waited whole nights, awake without answer or reprieve. When I did sleep, I dreamed of Gomorrah, of my life crashing into dusty dissolve. I felt guilty and hellbound, but I didn't actually do anything gay beyond daydream my first semester of college. Once a month or two, I'd take the city bus north to a Barnes & Noble on the edge of town, and I'd stuff a Curve magazine inside another periodical. Then I'd hide in a corner to secretly read about lesbians. I developed imagined crushes on the girls inside. I downloaded the albums the writers suggested, and when I listened to Slater-Kinney and Tegan and Sarah in my dorm room, I pretended I lived in Portland or Vancouver, cities where the lesbian bands lived and played music. I tried briefly to find a girlfriend online, but the only gay dating site was Planet Out, and you had to pay to join. I didn't have a credit card, and even if I had, I couldn't afford the $40 membership fee. My parents had only given me $20 for college, a crisp bill my mom pushed into my hands in a Popeye's bathroom the day they dropped me off. I was so broke when classes started, I had to steal the $300 calculus textbook from the campus bookstore. I worked in the college communications department that fall, but I had to save every minimum wage paycheck I earned to pay for my second semester books. Planet Out cost as much as the geology text I needed to buy. Still, I visited the site every day. If you didn't pay the membership fee, Planet Out let you see distorted photos of all the options in your region. In Mississippi, the region was the entire South, and the options were 6 blurry women. But I refreshed the page every afternoon, searching for love in the blur. I lasted all of January without yearning, but then in February, I went out for coffee one Friday night, and I saw a girl, and I lost my resolve. She was the barista, and when I ordered an Irish cream latte, which I thought was very sophisticated, she told me she liked my shirt. It was a polka-dotted long-sleeve button-up I'd bought for $1 at a thrift store. She asked me if she could touch it. She didn't look gay, but when she reached for my arm, I knew I would remember that touch for the rest of my life. Her hands were slim, her hair was shoulder length, and my voice cracked when I tried to speak to her. I told her my name was Casey. She said hers was Ellen, not this Ellen, a different Ellen. She said hers was Ellen, and I thought that must be some kind of sign. The most famous lesbian in the world was named Ellen. How could this girl not like girls too? I drank my latte slow, and as I watched Ellen fix other people's coffees, I tried to memorize everything I could about her. She was wearing Granny Smith apple green shoes. She laughed a lot. She had brown eyes and hair that was either light brown or dark blonde, and she looked tiny behind the counter. Between customers, she turned back to me and I grinned sheepishly. Her smile was a wide, uninhibited square. I was too nervous to ask for her number when my friends and I left that night, so I wrote down my AOL Instant Messenger name, then slid it across the counter while Ellen took out the trash. She messaged me a few days later, and soon we were sending each other long emails 3 times a week. We wrote about Alanis Morissette and Allen Ginsberg, and we copied whole sections of Oscar Wilde essays into our emails. We sent each other folk songs and Adrienne Rich poems. So, by the way, Dr. Franny, thanks for helping me flirt. I was studying French, and Ellen was translating Latin, and in between our schoolwork, I attempted to flirt with her by typing out a primitive winking emoji. We never used words like gay or crush, but I didn't need language or labels to confirm the heat I felt. A month after I met Ellen, I told my roommate I was smitten with the girl. I tried to describe Ellen, but for the first time in my life, I liked someone too much to put adjectives together. She was cuter than the short-haired seniors, more vivid than the blurry options on Planet Out. She knew centuries-old poems and songs that seemed not to have been released yet, and once at a speech tournament, she performed in what I assumed was a perfect Romanian accent. I spent the little money I had buying coffee so I could see her. She looked at me over the counter with an eye contact I described to my friends as precise, which is to say her dark eyes searched mine in a way that felt daring. She never looked away. She touched my arms when she handed over my lattes, and I could have spent the rest of the school year listening to her laugh. I sat at the closest table and tried to read my art history textbook, but the Venus de Milo seemed pedestrian compared to the teenage barista whose smile made my heart clang around my ears. We only went out in public together once. 20 years later, I'm still not sure if it was a date, which, for those of you who are not a lesbian, that is the whole thing of lesbianism, is you never know when it's a date, even now. One Friday night in mid-March 2002, Ellen picked me up, then drove me across town to a fast casual restaurant that specialized in oversized baked potatoes. It's McAllister's. She ordered tortilla soup in a bread bowl, which also I reached out to her to fact check this, and I initially had that she ordered broccoli cheese soup, and that was, all of this I'm like describing her, later on I describe her lips and like the way she's kissing, and the only thing she had a problem with was that she would never eat broccoli cheese soup. Okay, anyway, she ordered tortilla soup in a bread bowl, an entree that struck me as sophisticated, and I, God help me, selected one of the potatoes. When mine showed up covered in hunks of pot roast, I felt embarrassed to be eating something so juvenile and messy. Almost as soon as we started eating, a professor from my college walked into the restaurant with her family, and I lost my appetite. Ellen and I weren't doing anything romantic. We weren't holding hands or even leaning toward each other, but I worried if the professor saw me, she'd know I was gay. I covered my potato with a paper napkin and told Ellen I didn't feel well. She drove me back to my dorm, and I ran inside, terrified that everyone in Mississippi would soon know my secret. The professor was Darby Ray, so I think, like, if she had known, like, she definitely would have been okay, but, like, of all the professors to be scared of, but I was scared. But I think that's all I'll read, because it gets boring to listen to people read after a while, I know. But spoiler alert, we do kiss, and then I wound up coming out to my parents or to my mom. Basically, once I kissed a girl, I knew I never wanted to kiss a boy again. Sorry to the men in the room, but it's just not as appealing as all, like, your faces are scratchy and there's too much spit. And so I really didn't want to turn back. And we were on Easter Sunday, they were singing my favorite song. And one sin that I am kind of sure is a sin is lying. And so I thought, like, I don't want to lie to my mom about this anymore. And so I told her I needed to tell her something, and she asked if I wanted to go up to the altar. And I was like, I don't think the altar's going to help me. Like, I've really tried. So I wound up coming out to her in the church bathroom, and it did not go well. She wound up writing any professor whose phone number she could find on the school website to tell them that Millsaps was a cesspool that turned me gay. And at the time, I told her that a college can't turn you gay, but now I don't know. You know, there were some things that lit the way for me. But and it all kind of came to a head on the 4th of July. I went home that summer after my freshman year to try to prove to my family I wasn't evil. And well, we were having this barbecue dinner, and my uncle like looked at me over the meat and said, "You ever heard of Sodom and Gomorrah?" And I was like, "I'm alive in North Louisiana. I have heard of Sodom and Gomorrah." I didn't send him my angel theory. And he said, "God destroyed a whole nation to get rid of homosexuality. What makes you think he wouldn't destroy you?" And my mom got up and ran to the bathroom and was crying. And that's where the book opens up with the scene with my mom crying in the bathroom. And my grandma barged in and basically told my mom to stop crying. And she like stuck her finger in my mom's face and said, my mom's name was Rhonda. And she said, "Rhonda Jean, life is a buffet. Some people eat hot dogs and some people eat fish." She likes women and you need to get the F over it. And I was, too shy to ask her to, tease apart that metaphor of like, how did she come to those particular entrees? I think it was on purpose, but when your grandma says some people like to eat fish, that's just something you don't really ever forget or get over for the rest of your life. Okay, I gotta stop thinking about my grandma thinking about that. But later that day, my grandma pulled me aside and just out of nowhere said, "I grew up across the street from a woman who lived as a man." And I was like, "What? Like, where?" Like, because my grandma grew up in like a really country little town. Like, there is one stoplight. Is that right, PK? Is there more than one stoplight now? No kidding. Dela's coming up with 2 stoplights. There was not really any industry at that time to speak of. My grandma grew up sharecropping, picking cotton, but once farming mechanized, her family all lost their sharecropping jobs and had moved here to this little tiny town to try to make a living. And it wasn't really the kind of place where I thought you could be a woman living as a man. This is 2002, so I didn't really have any language for like what I don't think we really had the word transgender. I think I maybe knew it, but it wasn't like something I knew a ton about. So the fact that my grandmother knew someone just really shocked me. And I remember I said, "Well, what happened to this person? Did they tar and feather them in the center of town?" And she was like, "No, honey, like everybody loved Roy." And she told me that she had grown up always just thinking of Roy as a guy who played country songs on his porch. And when his mom died, she called my great-grandma Rita Mae across the street and confessed that she had stolen him when he was a little girl from an abusive family, then raised him as a boy. And so my grandma was like, "I want you to go to Delhi, and I want you to find out about Roy. Like, I want you to see, is this kidnapping story true, and like what happened to him?" Because he had been really important to my grandma, but she had lost touch with him because she'd married someone who was in the military, and they wound up traveling around the world and stuff. And so that's what this book is about. At the time, I thought I would just make one quick trip, and I would get a little thing of microfiche and load it, and there'd be an article that said, "Baby stolen from Hot Springs, Arkansas. Here's the original family. Here's all the information you want to know, Casey." I thought it would be addressed to me personally. And after a couple of wheels around the microfiche, I figured out that was not true, because actually the newspapers back in the day, they pretty much only wrote about rich white people and like which rich white person visited which other rich white person. And so there were no poor people and no black people in the entire newspaper, and it is a very poor and also very black town. So it was like the 7 people who weren't that were the only ones who were in the newspaper all the time. So it was a useless newspaper. It wound up taking me 20 years, not one visit. And that's what this book is about. I'm not sure, am I just supposed to keep on talking, or is someone coming to ask me questions, or are y'all asking me questions, or I have no idea what's happening. I'm just spinning out talking forever. Me spinning out is good. Thank you. I'm getting sweatier by the second. Yeah, otherwise y'all are just going to start hearing about God knows what.
Impromptu Q&A. We've got Casey here. Has anybody got a question for Casey?
Y'all are already beating Oxford, Mississippi. People didn't really want to ask questions there.
There we go. In my own work, which was a secret for 30 years.
Your work was a secret for 30 years?
My writing.
Interesting.
I track the development of Millsaps through the years. It's hard to read your book without comparing it to Mississippi Sissy, which is 2 gay Millsaps students. Not quite different generations, but, well, I guess they are different.
Yeah, Kevin's a little bit older than me.
Your book is a lot more hopeful and a lot better written. Both deal with people that did hurtful things that you have to write about honestly. And I thought you did that deftly and kindly while still being honest.
Thank you.
I guess there's not really a question in that, other than I suppose will be a third book in this trilogy with somebody who's maybe a
Is
student.
anyone gay and a writer in here tonight? We will pass the torch on to you.
Anyway, thank you very much. I was going to get you to sign it, but I only use Kindle.
What'd you say?
I was going to get you to sign my book, but I only use Kindle.
Oh.
Another question for all right.
I wanted to know what was the thought process behind putting all of these stories together in one book and not, because I just to say my own personal bias, I love that you did that and that you made that decision to both talk about your experience as an author and a person who's unraveling the story. And I just wanted to know why it was important to you to tell them all as one.
Okay. Well, I always knew I wanted to write about other people in the town, in part because there's just not that much info about Roy, and it would be hard to build a whole book around him because, I guess this will change with the internet, but historically, poor people have not left a huge record to go, a huge archive, because all newspapers in this country were like the Delhi newspaper, where they only wrote about a select few powerful white people. And unless people are keeping their own stories and telling it themselves, those stories just disappear. And he did keep his own story. He wrote a journal every day of his life, but his neighbors didn't really want those journals to be read. And there just weren't other records of him, really. There were people's memories, but by the time I got to town, most of those people were in their 80s, or PK was the young one, but PK knew Roy when PK was 12, so had a 12-year-old's understanding of him. So there wasn't a lot of facts to build off of it, especially when I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get to read his journals. So I knew I wanted to write about the other people I interviewed about him, in part because they themselves had very interesting stories. A lot of them felt like misfits themselves in the town, and that isn't just the gay people. The straight people also felt that way. They felt like they'd been left behind by the whole country. And I just thought they were also interesting, and that's one fun thing you can do in a book that you can't do in a newspaper article is you can just, go buck wild and include anything not anything you want to be focused, but you can widen the lens, I guess, to use a cliche. As for my own self and mother and family, I did not want to include that at all. In fact, I was making this as a documentary for a long time, and the person who was making it with me would often want me to sit in the frame for the film thing, and I would never want to. And I feel bad, a lot of the footage is like me sitting on the edge of the couch, like trying not to be in the film at all. Because I'm a newspaper journalist, like I like writing about other people. I do not like to talk about myself or write about myself. The whole fun of being a journalist to me is learning about other people and like getting to ask strangers things you would never ask your own family. In short, I'm nosy. And yeah, I'm Southern, so pretty much the same thing. And people for years would try to get me to be in the documentary, and I would be like, no, I'm not doing that, because I'm never going to get to be a normal journalist after that if I put myself out in the world like that. And then I took a book writing class at Columbia, and you had to write 6 chapters in that class. And the professor asked me to write one about myself, and I did not want to do it. I was like, no, I'm trying to be a regular journalist here. Like, you're going to make me never get a job again if I do that. And I remember him saying, like, oh, come on, don't act like you don't have skin in the game. Like, it isn't just anybody who'd be interested in Roy. Like, there's a reason that you're interested in him. And finally, he kind of pulled the, like, your graduation depends on this card. And so I agreed to do it. And I wrote one. Actually, I think that part of what I read was in the chapter that I wrote, and it ends with the pastor, after I came out, that my mom went down to the altar herself, and the pastor went in front of the whole church and said, Lord, save her and take her, i.e. that I would ask for forgiveness for my Angelina Jolie obsession, and then I would die immediately and go to heaven. And once I wrote that, I knew it was better than anything else I had written in his class. And that's a horrible feeling, to know that somebody else is right about the thing you really don't want to do. But the writer/reader in me could just tell, and I wanted to make the best possible thing, so I thought, okay, fine, I'll put myself in here a little bit. And then while I was in that class, my mother died, and then he said, well, you need to put your mother in the book. And I was like, oh, no, my mother is not a part of this. Like, you only think that because she died. Like, we had so many fights. I was like, I'm not putting my mother in this book. And he was like, well, I think you just do one chapter for me this summer. Like, again, pulled the graduation depends on it card. Just write one thing about your mother and just see, like, who's going to read it besides me? No one will ever even know. So I went home. And for some reason, I had forgotten this, but the very first reporting trip I took to Delhi, I took my mother. And this is not something that is a normal journalist thing to do. Like, I don't know any of my colleagues at the Washington Post that take their mothers with them. I think that's frowned upon in the journalism ethics. I don't know. But in part, I really wanted to be close to my mom, and I didn't know how to be. And also, she was a really great talker, like way better talker than me. She was super charismatic, and she could get anyone to talk. And she would ask people like even crazier things than I would ask them. She would just like cut to the chase. PK's nodding her head like she's asked PK a couple of uncomfortable questions. And also, like, my mom grew up in this town, so I thought, okay, well, she's going to know some people, and they're going to want to talk to her. I didn't realize my mom was actually kind of an outcast in the town, so it didn't really work that way. But I had taped that first trip, and so I pulled up the video footage, and I started watching it. And one of the first things I think that started to crystallize the book for me is we had met this gay guy in town who offered to take us to the cemetery to see where Roy was buried. And right before that, his neighbor came out of the house. This is actually an ex of yours. and started screaming, "You're just here to steal Roy's songs. Tim McGraw already stole all of Roy's songs." Tim McGraw actually did grow up in this town, or like right adjacent to it. So my mom and this gay guy were in the cemetery talking about how this person came out and accused me of being like Tim McGraw, a thief. And my mom says to this guy, well, you know, I wanted to tell her, like, we're not here to steal anything. This is a journey of self-discovery for my daughter because she's gay. And in the video, I was like holding a still camera. I pulled the camera down and looked at my mother and said, don't tell people I'm gay. And at that point, I was 26. And in my memory of myself at 26, I was just like super gay. Like, I don't care who knows it. Anyone who knew me at 20 might remember my mohawk that I had. Once I got used to being gay, I was like, I am gay. Like, I'm doing whatever. So in my mind, I thought of myself as like really brashly gay. And so to watch this video and see me looking at her saying, don't tell people I'm gay, I could see like how scared I actually was and like how much lying I had done to myself. And then my mom looked so disappointed because it had taken her a lot to accept me, and she felt like she was proud of me and like, I guess, bragging on me in the cemetery. But, and I think that for me was the moment that I understood why I spent 20 years doing this, that it was about, as my mother so cheesily said, a journey of self-discovery. That's a long answer, I'm sorry, but that is why I included everybody in there. The poor person who interviewed me in Oxford last night only got to ask 3 questions because all my answers are so long, so I'm just gonna warn y'all now.
It's all right. So I love reading memoir because I'm also nosy. And one of the things that always is so hard to me is to think about like how well I could remember anything to document. And until you mentioned like having to fact check yourself, that would be horrible. So was there anything that came through that fact checking experience that changed anything in the process for you? Or was there anything as you were writing that other people's memories affected how you told the story?
Yeah, so I tried, once I decided that I would write about myself, I just tried to treat myself like I would anyone else I write about, which is, give me everything you got to prove everything you just told me. So usually if I'm writing about someone, I'd be like, give me all the pictures you have. Can I see what your room looks like? Do you have a journal? Is there like anyone who is there with you? Like, I'll try to Facebook friend them and go deep stalking on that. Now you're getting the behind the scenes of what some people I wrote about are here. So for myself, I have kept a journal since I was in like 4th or 5th grade, and I still have all of those journals. And then I also, back in the days when I worked in a bureau at the newspaper, which is like where they put you in a suburb and you're really not very important to the newspaper at all, I did a lot of G-chatting all day long. And so I had all of those G-chats and pictures and stuff. So I started to go back through and see. And there are a couple of things that really stand out to me that I was wrong about. One, when I initially started, I was thinking like, oh, your childhood wasn't that bad, like you're misremembering it. And then when I went to go look at my childhood journals, they were much worse than I remembered them. My mom struggled with pain pill addiction my whole life, and to read my like 10-year-old self writing about it really shocked me. Like there were quite a few about being afraid that my mom wasn't, I would like write, I'm too scared to go to school because I think my mom's dead. She's passed out. I don't know what's going to happen. Like I have to stay here. There was one from 7th grade where we couldn't afford my school fees, and so my mom told me I needed to drop out, which is, I don't know if it's funny, but obviously that wasn't really going to happen. And I kind of sound like a little adult in some of them. And so there was like a piece of me that felt, I guess, broken open by that. Sometimes it's easier to live your life if you lie to yourself about stuff. I mean, I don't know if you ultimately get a really happy life. I think before I wrote this book, like I thought like, okay, I'm not totally traumatized, but I wouldn't say I was happy. And then like once I wrote it, I was really unhappy and really depressed for a long time, but now I've come back around. So sometimes I think you do have to excavate that stuff, but the excavating is horrible. And then the other thing is, as I told that professor, I was like, my mom has nothing to do with this. And then after I wrote that one chapter, I told him, I was like, well, I'm not putting her in the book anymore because she didn't go on any more trips with me. Like, she let me down after that. She was supposed to do this with me. And then one day I was like looking for, there was this old lady who sang a hymn that she wrote for me. Or not, she didn't write it for me, she wrote it for God. And she played it for me. And I wanted to listen to it because it was really beautiful. And so I was just looking for the footage. I pulled it up. And as she's starting to play, I can hear my mom talk in the background. And I was like, wait a second, is my mother on this trip with me? And so I like start picking up things, and sure enough, my mother is just there with me. And like, I don't know why I had just totally blocked her out. I think sometimes you can lie to protect yourself, and sometimes I don't know why you lie to yourself. Like, I lied to myself and just said, my mom disappointed me at every turn. And she did disappoint me a lot, but not on that trip, apparently. She did go with me. So I'm lucky that I had the video footage from all this that helped to fact check it. But I think both of those, because by the time I wrote the book, my mom was dead. It really changed my relationship to her in some ways. And I think also just having the footage, there were a lot of times where she would tell me things on footage. And at 26, I really did not care to hear about it. And I was just kind of a brat. And so I was like, okay, we're not here to learn about you, woman. Like, we're here to learn about this. But then by the time I was writing it, I was 36, 37. And I knew I'd never get to ask my mom anything again. And so I heard it in a way I never heard it when I was there. And, you know, I'm mad at my 26-year-old self that I didn't ask any follow-up questions. But I'm glad that I have it so I can just go listen and learn about her with like a calmer mind. Thank you for asking. Yes. It's you.
It's me. Oh, Alex. Okay, Alex, coming to you.
So I'm a huge fan of your story about Holmes County, and yes, amazing. I taught in Washington County, and I feel like your story was one of the few stories that like got it right about the Delta and that part of Mississippi, whatever right means.
Oh, thank you.
So my question, and I don't know if this is a particularly like helpful question, is how do you approach like your education writing versus like your memoir writing? Is there a different process, or is it similar?
Well, I think it's similar, except it requires a lot of the subject. I think this is one thing people don't talk a lot about in journalism is in order to do a really good story, you have to ask someone to do a lot of free work for you. And in this case, it was a teenager who also was going to school. And I tried to, you know, like I said, I try to treat myself that way in memoir, but it's just very different because if anything that's right in that article is only right because of Harvey being willing to talk about it, and like at great risk to himself because he had to go back to school and people weren't necessarily happy about that. Yeah, so it just is, it's always an uncomfortable part of journalism to me because it always takes longer than people think it's going to take. And, you know, sometimes they get tired of you or they just want to, like, play video games or do something else, you know. But I'm like, we're doing this story, and, like, I'm getting paid for it, but you're not, and my name's going on it. And so it's just there is something nice, I guess, writing a memoir that it's like the person I'm asking to do all the work is myself, and so there's less of that weird feeling, though there's another weird flip side for memoir where I don't have everyone's permission to write. I didn't ask my mom if I could write about her. I mean, I don't think she would mind. There are people in the book that I think would mind, whose names I changed or whom I left out. I tried to think about that. But there are people, you know, who didn't necessarily ask me to do this, whereas when you're writing an article, you kind of have to be getting consent over and over again.
And I think we have a question over here. So,
I loved your book. It has so many incredible layers, and I just think it's a beautiful portrait of a place, too, a complicated portrait. And I'm just curious, now that you don't live in the South and that, you know, you were doing most of this research, traveling back and forth, do you feel like leaving home allowed you to write this story more clearly?
Oh, Oh, yeah. I mean, it's always a complicated feeling for me. Like, even just yesterday, I was like, why don't I live here? Or just like hanging out in the country. And I was in Oxford, so I pretty much cried all the way down I-55. It's funny, like things when I first left, I would think, when I first got to Oregon, which is just super green and stays green all year long, I came back and I was like, this place is ugly. Like, I had just never seen anything outside of the South. And now I've been gone long enough, I was like, I love all the brown here. But I don't think I felt that way at 21, 22. And I just didn't know myself, or like, I couldn't, there's so many things about my own life that I didn't have any context for until I could leave and study it. So for instance, like I mentioned that my family was poor, but my parents had me as teenagers in 1983, and that's around when the oil bust happened in Louisiana. And at the time, like Louisiana's economy was like 65% oil. So once oil goes away, like the whole economy is just totally busted. Like the state economist in Louisiana told me, so many people left Louisiana, they ran out of U-Hauls. And I had always just thought like this was a personal failing of my parents when I was a kid, but it really wasn't. Like there were so many forces against them, and like my mom tried to open up a daycare in her house, and like now I have covered daycare a lot or childcare for my Washington Post job, and now I see like that whole business is just broken, and we as a country depend on broken businesses to fund capitalism. And that, the reason it's broken is racism. And so there's just all those kinds of things that I didn't know. Some of that's about leaving, some of it's just about getting older and knowing how to report more. But I don't think I could really, when I had never left, I didn't know what was different or distinctive. Like I didn't know that pine trees weren't the only trees in the world. I didn't know, there's little things like the way people wave at you if there's like a truck passing you and you're walking down the street, and that person, even if they don't know you, and even if they would be likely to hate you, they're still going to wave at you, which would never happen in Portland. And I just didn't know that that was anything special, because that's just how I grew up. And I'm not sure I would have ever missed it or seen anything special about it if I hadn't left, because I just felt so scared and sad here, and so desperate to see anything else in the world. Like I hadn't seen it. We didn't go on vacation, so I hadn't seen anything outside of here. And now that I have seen a lot of places, like I have so much more affection for this one, if that makes any sense.
Thank you, Casey. It was great to hear you, and I loved the book. I'm a New Yorker, and we have a Delhi, too.
Oh.
Upstate. I know Michael has told you we're having a banned book festival here, the first one in Mississippi in a few weeks. And many of the books that have had problems in schools and public libraries around Mississippi have had gay content. And I wondered if you had any ideas about why that is.
Well, interestingly, I will say the banned books also get really good sales. So some of my friends in Louisiana were trying to get my book banned for a little bit. They were like, one of my friends is a real rabble-rouser, and he was like, which conservative people can I tell that this is a gay book to? And I'm like, okay, I don't think my job was going to like this. But it hasn't been banned yet, which is kind of wild, actually. Yeah, I mean, well, one of the most interesting things to me about Roy's life is he was born in 1925. A lot of the places in the book where he exists take place in like 1950s, 60s. And he definitely did face persecution. Like preachers would tell him he couldn't come to church there unless he wore a dress. But he mostly could just live his life in this little town. There weren't laws passed against him. He did not represent a geopolitical threat. Now, he didn't have a community either, but not a community, I mean a community of like other trans people or other gay people. But there weren't people coming at him with pitchforks. Like most people in town did feel like they loved him. And I don't think those same people would now. I mean, most of them are dead, but there's one person that I interviewed that I thought was very open-minded. She was a conservative person, but she seemed very open-minded, like when I was talking to her. And then years later, I went to go look at her Facebook, and she was just railing about how much she hated Mexicans. And something had changed in the 10 years between when I first interviewed her, because she wasn't like that at all when I interviewed her. So I think some of it is a dictated outrage, and people, I think there are some people who have those deeply held beliefs. There are some people who co-opt those deeply held beliefs to try to get elected, although it actually has not worked. Like, most people who have run anti-trans things have not actually won their elections. But I have to be careful because I'm a newspaper reporter. But some conservative people at organizations that specialize in this thing have been kind of open about, like, we think this is a political winner for us, and we're going after this because, I mean, it was very similar to gay marriage in 2004, where they needed people to go vote for George W. Bush over John Kerry, and one way to get people to the ballots is to put gay marriage on it, which Mississippi banned same-sex marriage by 87% that year, which is 9 out of 10 people. You know, that is a lot. Like, when I remember going to the gas station and being like, okay, there are 10 people in here, 9 of them hate me. So I think there's a concerted effort. I mean, I actually just had this like trove of emails leaked to me recently from people in lawmakers in Alabama, South Dakota, and other places, and they were basically making this game plan of like, okay, first we have to get people angry about trans children, and then we can move on to this. So I do think there is like a concerted effort to get the word out, to be angry about these particular books. The most banned book in the country, Genderqueer, is on an extremely small press. It's a, forgot the word, graphic novel. Those books do not move a lot of numbers normally. Like, if that book weren't banned, I don't think most people in the country would have ever heard of that book. I don't mean that as an offense to the author. That's just how book publishing goes. That's why my friends want mine to get banned. But so I don't think a lot of times it's even that people have read the book, so you just get told that this is something that you're against. And then when you, I do think people have deeply held religious beliefs that make them feel like it's the right thing to do. A lot of times I think people leading book bans aren't actually evil. They're following what they believe to be the right thing to do, and maybe if they had a Roy in their life or even a Casey in their life, they might feel differently. I mean, some of my relatives, their Twitter handles are MAGA, and yet they will contact me and be like, so were you dating any girls lately? And they'll, like, they want to know about me, but then they'll, be on Twitter ranting. So I do think there is a kind of weird discrepancy that way. Yeah, thank you for asking.
I have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, if anybody has a question for Casey.
My memory's terrible, so you may say it in the book. But I'm so proud of you, as are we all, I think. But I don't remember if you say how the book got published, and maybe it was through your Columbia class. But I mean, New York Times bestseller page on the cover, Casey Parks. How did you do it?
I did go to Columbia for my master's, which was a weird experience because, like, on the first day of school, they kind of show you like all of the internships that are only for Columbia students. And I remember sitting there feeling like, oh my God, power works exactly how I think it does in this country. And second, thank God I bought into it. But it's true, like, it is all about connections. Like, it's interesting sometimes to hear the bio because my bio sounds fancy and I don't feel fancy. Like, I'm just not really a fancy person, but none of the like fancy places that I wrote for would be possible if I didn't go to Columbia, because you just have to know someone. Like, the New Yorker does not take submissions. You have to know somebody. And the only way to know somebody is to go to Columbia. And it's interesting, like, all of those places, and actually even my Washington Post job I got just from, they liked an Oregonian story I did, but you don't get that call unless you have that degree. So same thing with the book. Power. I bought the Power. Well, I had a scholarship, so somebody bought it for me. But there's a book writing class there that I mentioned, and at the end, he picks like the best student, and I won the best student. And he introduced me to my agent, and actually, the first time we talked, I really loved her because she told me she had this whole theory about Dolly Parton. She thinks Dolly Parton is gay, and she was giving me all the evidence that Dolly Parton is gay. And so I was like, oh, this is who I want to be my agent. Also, she told me that her father drove Bob Dylan around in a hearse and introduced him to Joan Baez. And when I was at Millsaps, my favorite song was Diamonds and Rust, which is a Joan Baez song about Bob Dylan. And I was like, oh my God, your dad's responsible for my favorite song. But then at the end of the talk, she was like, I think you're a really good writer, but I didn't have Roy's journals. And she was like, if you don't have Roy's journals, you don't have a book. So I'm sorry, I can't represent you. And I was so bummed out. And then probably like 6 months went by, and then I got a story in the New Yorker, and then like a ton of agents wanted to represent me. And when I talked to them, they all were just they made me feel so gross. Like they're just, a lot of them were like, ooh, poor Southern lesbian, I can sell that. And I just didn't feel like they really got me, like it was gonna be kind of a cliched trope book. And so I emailed her back and I was like, look, I don't have the goods, but I just really like you more than anyone else. Is there any way you'll reconsider? And she said, okay, I'll take the long view, but you have to go back one more time and try. And so PK and I went back one more time, and I have no idea why. I guess I'm spoiler alert for anyone here, but it worked. I literally asked this man for the journals every single year for 10 years, and he said no. And then he said yes this one time. So then she agreed to represent me, and then if y'all want the nitty-gritty, you have to write a book proposal, and it's like 100 pages, and it is a really weird document because you have to like outline the entire book and then also like talk about how awesome you are and how everyone is going to want to buy your book. And you have to compare yourself to famous people and be like, obviously I'm a mix of Willie Morris and Cheryl Strait. Like, so it's just weird, it's not my personality at all, so it was a really weird thing to do. And then your book proposal is also supposed to be kind of in like the style that you would write it in. It's a very weird document. Anyway, then she sends it out to people, to publishing people, and then they can decide if they want to talk to you or not. So then they interview, I think there were 8 or 9 who were interested, and then they tell you how much they would be willing to pay you for the book, and then it can go to auction where they like bid off of each other. And this is where it helps to have a good agent, because I went with Knopf, and like it was like between Knopf and Grove, and the agent just called Knopf, was like, I don't know if Knopf is going to do right by Casey. You're kind of a big publishing house. And they upped their offer by $75,000. Just off of that one thing, so it's good to have a badass agent. And then from there, you're on your own. You just write the whole book, and it's very different than newspaper reporting, where I'm pretty needy, and so I need to ask my editor's help a lot, or like just need somebody to talk to me. And I was writing this in the pandemic, so there wasn't really anyone to talk to, and I couldn't leave my little 400 square foot apartment that I was sharing with my ex and 3 cats. And you really don't hear from the editor at all. You just write the whole book, which is, I had never written one before, so just kind of learning to write a book as I did it. So consequently, there's some parts that just aren't that good, I'm sorry, but. And then the editor writes you like a 14-page letter. It's not like line edits, it's just like, here's my thoughts on your book, and then you can edit it again yourself. I don't know, it's a whole weird process. Maybe that's more information than you wanted to know, but.
Well, Casey, despite all the comparisons that you had to do in your book proposal, we're so glad that you're you, the unique and awesome person that you are. We're so proud of you, and I hope that everyone will join me, please, in thanking Casey Parks for this evening. It's been so wonderful.
Yeah, thank y'all for being here. So So I think I'm going to sign books, so if y'all want to come see how sweaty I got up here, you're welcome to. But thank you so much. It's so great to see all of y'all here and to be home.
Yeah, please purchase a copy of Casey's book from Lemuria right over here in the corner. Casey will be available to sign, and we have a reception right out the door to my right, to your left. Please join us for that too, and thanks again for coming.
Yeah, you want to come sit over here?